The metal bars were cold beneath Elias Wardell's trembling palms. For the first time in years, he was standing, barely, his weight swaying between determination and fear. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air. Outside, a humid Bangkok morning pressed through the hospital windows. A nurse gasped softly, but Elias wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the woman across the room, the one whose steady gaze had never left him through pain, anger, or despair. Naomi Claire's smile trembled as tears slid down her cheeks. "You're doing it," she whispered. He wanted to answer, but his throat closed with emotion. When he finally spoke, it was barely a breath. "Thank you for not giving up on me." And for the first time in years, Elias Wardell, a man the world once called the visionary of modern tech, felt alive. Have you ever known someone who gave up on life until love reminded them to breathe again? This is the story of a man who had everything, lost it all, and found something far greater. Welcome, my beautiful family, to Mr. Donovan Stories, where every tale reminds us that kindness still has power and love still redeems. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe, drop a like, and share this story with someone who could use a little hope today. Long before the accident, Elias Wardell's name shimmered across magazine covers, the billionaire who changed the future of tech. He built empires from ideas, inspired thousands, and spent his fortune on sky-high offices and private jets that touched clouds. Success had become his reflection until one night metal twisted, glass shattered, and the man who conquered markets was conquered by fate. He survived, but his spine did not. After months of surgery, he was told he might never walk again. The doctors delivered the news gently. The world repeated it loudly. And the woman who once promised forever packed her diamond necklace and left before sunrise. In the echo of her absence, silence became Elias's new companion. Now, years later, his penthouse sat above the heart of the city, a palace of chrome and glass that overlooked everything, yet felt like a tomb. The hum of his motorized chair replaced the sound of footsteps. Dust settled on awards. His reflection in the window looked more like a ghost than a man. Each morning arrived the same way, a housekeeper leaving coffee by the window, a therapist trying to coax conversation, another nurse walking out in tears before the week ended. "Sir, please, she's new," his assistant once pleaded when Elias shouted at a young caregiver. "She'll quit by Friday," Elias muttered, turning his chair toward the rain-streaked window. "They always do." The city pulsed far below him, cars honking, people laughing, dreams moving on. He hated the sound of it. Inside, the penthouse resembled a museum of forgotten life. A grand piano gathered dust beside untouched wine glasses. Photographs of smiling investors stared from silver frames. The pool on the balcony reflected the grey sky like a mirror of regret. Every caregiver who entered that world carried hope and left carrying disappointment. Some left quietly, some left crying. One slammed the door so hard that the housekeeper nearly quit too. "He doesn't want to live," she whispered once. "And he won't let anyone else live around him either." Still, the agency kept sending replacements. Money wasn't the problem. The problem was the man behind the money. Elias Wardell had once led boardrooms with precision. Now he commanded loneliness with the same authority. He told himself he didn't need anyone. But every time another nurse walked out, a faint voice inside asked if maybe, just maybe, he did. It was a grey Tuesday when the last caregiver packed her bags. She'd endured his sarcasm for 9 days. On the 10th, he snapped over a breakfast tray. "You think pity feeds me?" He'd barked. She left without a word, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. When his assistant returned that afternoon, Elias merely said, "Hire another one. Someone who won't talk too much." The assistant nodded but hesitated. "Sir, the agency says we're out of candidates willing to come." "Then find one who doesn't read the news," Elias replied coldly. "Tell them the pay's doubled." But deep down, he knew money couldn't buy what he truly needed. Peace. He rolled to the window again, staring at a city that no longer needed him. The reflection of his chair merged with the skyline like a wound that refused to close. Across the city, under buzzing hospital lights, another life was reaching its breaking point. Naomi Clare stood at a counter, clutching an envelope of overdue bills and a printed job listing. Her palms were damp. The nurse at the reception desk offered a sympathetic smile. "Home care position for Mr. Wardell?" she asked. "You sure you want that one?" Naomi's voice was calm but tired. "Does it pay on time?" "It pays well, but no one lasts. He's difficult." "I'm not afraid of difficult," Naomi said. Her 8-year-old daughter, Rena, was asleep in a nearby room, her tiny chest rising beneath the hum of monitors. Naomi brushed a curl from the girl's forehead, whispered a silent prayer, and folded the job posting carefully into her purse. She didn't know that the choice she made that day would rewrite the ending of a man who had already stopped believing in endings at all. Elias stared at the rain sliding down the glass wall of his penthouse. Somewhere in the city, an agency clerk typed a new name into his schedule. Naomi Clare, home care assistant. Start date, Monday. He frowned at the sound of the elevator arriving. Another one already, he thought bitterly. They never learn. What he didn't know was that this woman wouldn't just change his routine. She would change everything. The elevator doors parted with a quiet chime. Naomi Clare stepped into the marble-floored entryway, her sensible shoes barely whispering against the stone. She paused, taking in the space, a palace carved from steel and silence. Every surface gleamed, but there was no warmth. "Mr. Wardell will see you in the study," the housekeeper murmured, eyes averted, as though afraid of breathing too loudly. Naomi nodded, smoothed the front of her cream blouse, and followed the echo of her own footsteps down a corridor lined with abstract art. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish. When she entered the study, a man in a charcoal sweater sat behind a desk large enough to seat a family. He didn't look up immediately. His eyes were fixed on a tablet, the faint hum of a motorized chair filling the silence. "Another one already," he said finally, voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Name?" "Naomi Clare," she answered. "Don't bother unpacking." Naomi met his gaze. His face was handsome still, in a distant way, but bitterness had carved deep lines around his mouth. "We'll see," she said quietly. His eyebrows lifted a fraction, surprise or irritation, or both. "They all say that I'm not they, Mr. Wardell." He stared a moment longer before turning his chair toward the window. "Breakfast is at 7. I don't like noise." "Then I'll bring silence with the coffee," Naomi replied. A small sound escaped him, something halfway between a scoff and a laugh, but he said nothing more. Naomi learned quickly that the work was simple in theory and exhausting in practice. Elias demanded precision. Eggs too soft were inedible. Oatmeal too thick was cement. When she reminded him about medication, he accused her of nagging. "You're not here to fix me," he said one evening, eyes cold. "And what exactly am I here for? To watch me fail at living?" Naomi folded her arms. "Then I'll watch," she said. "But I'll still remind you that you haven't failed yet." For a heartbeat he said nothing, and in that silence something shifted. It wasn't acceptance, just confusion that anyone would talk back without fear. The next morning she found a note on the counter in his sharp handwriting, "Therapy. 11 a.m. Don't bother if you're busy." She smiled faintly and brewed his coffee anyway. Each day she arrived before dawn, humming softly as she moved through the penthouse. She greeted the staff by name, left breakfast notes, and opened the curtains wide to let sunlight spill across the sterile furniture. By the third week, the housekeeper whispered, "He hasn't yelled in days." Naomi only said, "Sunlight helps." Rain drummed against the windows one grey afternoon. Elias sat facing the storm, his wheelchair angled toward the city skyline. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Naomi said, setting a mug of tea beside him. "It's just rain," he muttered. "No," she answered, "it's proof that even the sky cries sometimes, and still clears afterward." He looked at her then, truly looked, as if hearing something he hadn't known he needed. She didn't wait for a reply, just walked away, humming the same tune she always hummed while working. That night, he found himself replaying her words, instead of the boardroom memories that usually haunted him. The rain outside felt different, less like punishment, more like cleansing. When Naomi left the penthouse, she went straight to the hospital. Her daughter Rena slept in a room bright with cartoons taped to the wall. The nurses adored her optimism. "Mom," the girl whispered when she woke, "did the new job go okay?" Naomi smiled. "It's a little hard, sweetheart, but we'll manage." Rena squeezed her hand weakly. "You always do." At the bus stop later that night, Naomi stared at the rain-soaked streets and thought of the man who lived high above the city, surrounded by luxury and loneliness. She wondered what it would take to reach a heart barricaded that tightly. A week later, she accidentally left her phone on the kitchen counter. When Elias picked it up, the screen lit with a picture of Rena, wide eyes, hospital bracelets, and a grin that could outshine clouds. The next morning he asked, trying to sound casual, "That little girl, your niece?" "My daughter," Naomi said, still arranging his breakfast tray. "She's stronger than she looks." He didn't reply, but when she left the room, he stared at the untouched oatmeal until it went cold. That night he dreamt of small hands drawing hearts on fogged glass. Days lengthened into weeks. Elias began showing up for physiotherapy sessions again. The therapist looked startled when he rolled into the gym unannounced. "What changed your mind?" she asked. He shrugged. "There's a woman who won't stop playing jazz in my house. Hard to sulk with Duke Ellington following you around." The therapist laughed softly. "Whatever works." When Naomi learned he'd attended, she said nothing, just placed fresh flowers on the dining table. He noticed. That evening, he watched her from across the room as she wiped down the counters. There was a steadiness in her movements, a quiet strength that filled the space without demanding anything from him. He realized he was waiting for the sound of her footsteps each morning, and that frightened him more than the accident ever had. One night, unable to sleep, Elias rolled toward the window again. The city glittered below, alive and merciless. His reflection stared back, a man haunted by pride, softened by something he didn't yet understand. He whispered into the glass, "What are you doing to me, Naomi Claire?" In her small apartment across town, Naomi knelt beside her daughter's bed, whispering a prayer of gratitude for one more peaceful day. Two souls, one trapped by bitterness, the other by circumstance, had begun orbiting the same hope without realizing it, and neither knew how close they were to changing each other's lives forever. The days that followed moved like quiet tides, steady, deliberate, and strangely tender. Something had shifted in the great penthouse above the city. The air no longer felt so cold. The staff no longer whispered about quitting. And for the first time in years, Elias Wardell no longer woke to the sound of his own bitterness echoing back at him. Each morning, Naomi arrived before sunrise, carrying the faint scent of coffee and jasmine soap. She would hum softly while preparing breakfast, her melody threading through the marble halls. It was a simple tune, but it filled the rooms with something Elias had forgotten existed: peace. He told himself it was nothing, just routine, but he caught himself waiting for it. He noticed the way light caught her hair when she passed by the window. He noticed the steadiness in her hands, the patience in her eyes, and the quiet courage that made her presence feel like sunlight after a long winter. One afternoon, Elias surprised the household by showing up early for therapy. The physiotherapist blinked when he rolled through the door. "Back again?" she asked. He smirked faintly. "Let's just say someone's been insisting I keep moving." Naomi stood a few steps behind him, arms folded, wearing that same calm smile that had disarmed him since the day they met. As he struggled through the exercises, sweat gathered on his forehead. His hands trembled on the metal bars, his breath shallow. "Enough," he grunted. Naomi's voice was gentle but firm. "Two more, Mr. Wardell." He shot her a glare, but she only raised an eyebrow. "You built an empire. Surely 2 more steps aren't the hardest thing you've ever done." He laughed under his breath, half frustration, half admiration, and forced his body to obey. When he finished, he collapsed back into his chair, exhausted. Naomi handed him a towel. "See? Still not a failure." For the first time in months, he didn't correct her, Later that evening, the two sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows as the city lights glittered below. Naomi sipped tea while Elias scrolled absently through his tablet. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. She looked up. "Leaving your employment? Leaving this life? The struggle, the exhaustion? Doesn't it ever feel heavy?" Naomi considered the question. "Every day. But my daughter needs me. And sometimes, when she smiles, the weight doesn't feel so heavy anymore." He set the tablet down. "You talk about her often. She's the best part of me," Naomi said, a soft smile curling her lips. "She's brave, even when she's scared. You'd like her." He was quiet for a long time, listening to the hum of the city. "You think she'd like me?" "She'd like anyone who makes her laugh," Naomi replied. "And you're not as impossible as you pretend to be." That made him laugh, a warm, unguarded sound that startled them both. A week later, Naomi's phone rang while she was folding towels. She answered absent-mindedly, expecting another hospital reminder. Instead, the voice on the other end said, "Mrs. Clare? We're calling about Rena. Her next surgery has been approved. Full coverage." Naomi froze. "Full coverage? But The hospital received a private sponsorship this morning. Anonymous donor." Her knees nearly gave way. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." That evening, she entered Elias's study. He sat surrounded by glowing screens, but she could tell by the way his hands fidgeted that he already knew. "Did you have anything to do with this?" she asked quietly. He didn't look at her. "I invest in hope sometimes." Naomi's voice trembled. "Elias, I can't—" He cut her off, still not meeting her eyes. "Don't thank me. Just keep believing it's worth it." She crossed the room and placed her hand over his. It was a simple touch, warm and human. For a man who had lived years behind glass walls, it felt like being touched for the first time in forever. From that day on, something unspoken connected them. Their conversations became longer, their silences more comfortable. Elias began asking about Rena's recovery, about Naomi's favorite books, about her childhood in a small coastal town. He told her stories from his youth, how he'd built his first company out of his college dorm room, how success had come so fast he'd forgotten to enjoy it. "I used to think money could buy time," he admitted one night. "Turns out, it just buys noise to drown out the silence." Naomi smiled sadly. "Then maybe silence is what you needed all along, to hear yourself again." He studied her for a moment. "You talk like someone who's lived 3 lifetimes." "Maybe I have," she said softly. He looked at her hands resting on the arm of the sofa, steady, graceful, a little worn from work, and felt an ache he hadn't known in years, longing. A storm rolled in one weekend. Thunder shook the windows, and rain cascaded in silver sheets down the glass walls. The power flickered once, then steadied. Naomi lit a few candles, the golden light dancing across polished surfaces. "Seems the city's crying again," she murmured. Elias gave a faint smile. "Maybe it just misses the sun. Or maybe it's learning to let go," she countered. The two shared a quiet moment as lightning flashed beyond the skyline. The rhythm of rain filled the silence between them. "Do you ever regret surviving?" Naomi asked gently. He hesitated. "Sometimes. The accident took more than my legs. It took the version of me people admired, the man my wife loved. What's left is this." Naomi looked at him, eyes bright with empathy. "What's left is the man who helped a child he's never met, the man who's learning to laugh again." He turned his face away, afraid she'd see the tears threatening to fall. "Naomi," he whispered, "I don't deserve your kindness." "Kindness isn't about who deserves it," she said. "It's about who needs it." Days later, they found themselves walking, well, she walking, he rolling, through the city park. Children chased bubbles near the fountain. Naomi laughed at something he said, a sound so effortless it made him forget for a moment that he was sitting in a chair. He watched her profile, the way sunlight touched her face, and something inside him unclenched. "You could have left like everyone else," he said quietly. "I thought about it," she admitted. But then I realized maybe you just needed someone who wouldn't. He reached up without thinking, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. She froze, eyes meeting his. The world seemed to pause, the laughter of children, the hum of traffic, the rush of the fountain fading into silence. "Naomi," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes? Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Thank you for letting me in." The sun dipped low behind the buildings, painting the sky in rose and gold. For a long time, they sat there, two souls bound by something wordless yet undeniable. Naomi glanced at him and said softly, "You know, Mr. Wardell, some people say love is a risk." He looked at her hand resting on the arm of his chair and covered it with his own. "Maybe the best ones are." Outside, the last light of day melted into evening, and with it, the first warmth of a love that would soon change both their lives forever. The next week slipped by in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Mornings began with sunlight spilling through tall windows and the smell of cinnamon. Toast. Naomi had learned it was the only breakfast that didn't invite complaint. Afternoons ended with quiet conversation by the window. The city stretched out beneath them like a sea of lights. Elias found himself doing small, unfamiliar things, asking how her daughter's day had gone, remembering to say thank you, even laughing at his own impatience. Naomi, in turn, stopped walking on eggshells. She teased him, challenged him, treated him like a man rather than a patient. Something delicate had taken root, invisible but undeniable. One night, when thunder rumbled in the distance, the two shared dinner in the library. Shelves of old business manuals and biographies towered around them, their spines gleaming in the lamplight. Naomi rested her elbows on the table. "You've read all of these?" "Once," Elias said, "when I thought the secret to success was hidden in someone else's story. And now? Now I think success is surviving your own." She smiled at that, tracing the rim of her cup. "Then you're one of the most successful people I know." He tilted his head. "You have a strange definition of success." "Maybe," she said, "but it's the kind that lasts." The power flickered briefly and returned. They both laughed, relieved. For the first time since the accident, laughter didn't feel like a betrayal of grief. It felt like a promise. Later that night, Elias wheeled to the balcony while Naomi cleared the dishes. The city below shimmered with neon reflections in puddled streets. He heard her humming softly inside, a lullaby gentle and nostalgic. He closed his eyes. The melody stirred something half forgotten, the sound of his mother humming when storms frightened him as a boy. He had spent years burying memories under work, ambition, and cynicism. Now one woman's song unearthed them like sunlight breaking through a sealed room. When Naomi joined him outside, he said quietly, "I used to think noise was proof of living. Now, I realize silence can be too, when it's shared." She looked at him with that calm, understanding smile. "That's because silence doesn't mean emptiness. It just means peace." He met her gaze and nodded. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she said, "but it's possible." A few days later, a courier delivered an envelope addressed to Elias. Inside was a letter from his ex-wife, polite, distant, apologetic. She'd heard rumors of his new caregiver and wanted to sell the last of their shared properties. Reading the words, dredged up anger he thought he'd outgrown. He crumpled the paper, then froze as Naomi appeared in the doorway. "Bad news?" she asked. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Old ghosts. Ghosts only haunt the places we refuse to clean," she said softly. He exhaled shakily. "She left when I needed her most. I told myself I'd never forgive that. And now?" He stared at the crushed letter. "Now, I just want to stop feeling like a victim in my own story." Naomi crossed the room and took the letter from his hand. "Then stop reading the past. Start writing what comes next." Her words settled over him like balm. For the first time, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like freedom. That night he couldn't sleep. He rolled to the window and looked out over the sleepless city. Down below, cars streaked like comets through rain. In the reflection, He saw Naomi's words written across his mind. Start writing what comes next. He whispered to the glass, maybe I can. The next morning, he asked his assistant to schedule a meeting with the hospital foundation. He, once funded, then surprised everyone by saying, and prepare a grant for pediatric research. Naomi found out only when the assistant told her. When she confronted Elias, he shrugged. Seems your daughter's hospital could use a few upgrades. She blinked back tears. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. Consider it a thank you for teaching me to care again. The following week, Naomi received a call from the agency that had hired her. Another wealthy client across the state wanted to double her salary. For a moment, practicality wrestled with loyalty. She thought of Rena's medical bills, of security, of the future. That evening, she told Elias, I haven't decided yet, but... He interrupted, voice quiet. If you need to go, you should... She hesitated. Would you be all right? He gave a crooked smile. I was all right before you came. I can manage. Naomi nodded, but neither believed the words. That night, Elias sat in the dark long after she left, the apartment too quiet, the air too heavy. He realized he didn't just miss her presence, he missed the way she made him believe in the next sunrise. 2 days later, the elevator chimed again. Elias turned his chair toward the sound, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. Naomi stepped out, rain clinging to her coat, eyes bright. I turned the offer down, she said. He blinked. Why? Because money doesn't tuck my daughter in at night, and because you still need someone to remind you to eat breakfast. He laughed, relief rushing through him. You're insufferably stubborn. She grinned. You're welcome. That small exchange sealed what neither dared to say aloud. The connection between them was no longer just gratitude or friendship. It was love quietly blooming in the spaces where pain once lived. One evening, while Naomi checked his therapy chart, Elias reached for her hand. Naomi, have you ever been afraid of hoping for too much? She looked up. Every day. And what do you do? I hope anyway, she said. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then maybe it's time I learn from you. Outside, the city lights blurred into constellations against the glass, as though the heavens themselves approved. The once reclusive billionaire, who'd built walls around his heart, had finally begun to open them. The decision that would change everything was waiting just around the corner, in a single email from across the world. Winter bled quietly into spring, and the penthouse that had once felt like a mausoleum had begun to breathe again. Morning light spilled through wide glass panes, catching on vases of fresh flowers that Naomi placed around the rooms. The faint sound of Rena's laughter sometimes echoed through the halls when she visited on weekends, tiny bursts of joy that softened even the most expensive corners of the house. Elias Wardell was changing. The shift was slow, but visible. He spoke to people again. He smiled at the housekeeper, asked about her grandson. He spent less time staring at screens and more time watching clouds drift beyond the skyline. The world outside his walls was beginning to matter again. One crisp morning, Naomi arrived to find him already awake, laptop open, a pile of documents spread across his desk. What's all this? She asked, setting his tea down. Applications, he replied. I've decided to start a foundation, grants for medical research and therapy programs. Something that gives people the second chance I almost threw away. Naomi smiled. That's wonderful. He shrugged, embarrassed by praise. Maybe. But it's time money stopped gathering dust. She studied him for a moment. The bitterness that once clouded his eyes had lifted. There was still pain there, but it was no longer running the show. Later that week, while Elias reviewed reports, a notification blinked. Across his screen, invitation, Thailand Rehabilitation Institute. He almost deleted it automatically. He'd seen it before. The same program had reached out years ago after his accident, promising groundbreaking treatments and new hope for mobility. He'd scoffed at it then. False hope, he had called it. But this time, he didn't delete it. His cursor hovered over the message. He opened it, scanned the details, then leaned back in his chair. When Naomi came in with lunch, he said without preamble, "Thailand still thinks they can fix me." She set the tray down carefully. "Do you want to go?" He looked out the window. "I don't know. I spent years convincing myself I didn't care." "What if I go and fail again?" Naomi stepped closer. "Then at least you'll know you tried." "That's more than most people can say." He turned his chair toward her. "Do you think people can change their minds without looking weak?" She met his eyes. "Only the strong ones can." That line lingered long after she left the room. The next few days were filled with quiet planning. Elias told his assistant to arrange travel. He notified the board of his foundation that he'd be away indefinitely. Naomi helped pack lightweight shirts, travel documents, medications. Rena insisted on drawing him a picture of the ocean with a stick figure standing upright in the waves. "That's you," she said proudly. He smiled and taped the drawing inside his journal. The morning of the flight, dawn brushed the city in pale gold. A sleek jet waited at the private terminal, its engines humming softly. Naomi stood beside him as the staff loaded luggage. "Last chance to back out," she teased. He smirked. After all this? Not likely. As the plane lifted off, the skyline dropped away beneath them. For a long while, Elias watched clouds drift below, silent. Naomi sat beside him, reading, occasionally glancing over with that calm presence he had come to rely on. Halfway across the ocean, he said quietly, "You know, I used to think hope was a kind of cruelty." She looked up. "And now I think it's the only thing that kept you walking through my door." The air in Bangkok was warm and sweet with the scent of frangipani. The hospital complex stood on a hill overlooking a river where lanterns floated at dusk. Doctors greeted them with practiced professionalism, explaining schedules and expectations. Elias listened, trying not to show his nerves. He had faced hostile investors and global crises, but this vulnerability felt far greater. That evening, in his new room overlooking the gardens, Naomi sat with him as he adjusted to the unfamiliar surroundings. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed. "You don't have to do it alone," she replied. Therapy was brutal. Muscles long dormant screamed in protest. Some days he managed a few minutes upright in the parallel bars. Other days, pain reduced him to silence. But every session ended with Naomi waiting by the door, her expression full of quiet faith. One morning, frustration boiled over. He slammed a hand against the bars. "This is pointless." Naomi stepped forward. "You've already survived worse." He glared at her, then sagged, breath ragged. "I'm tired of surviving. I want to live." "Then stand for life, Elias. Not for pride, not for the past. Just for life." Her words hung in the humid air, simple and undeniable. He nodded, wiped sweat from his brow and tried again. Weeks turned into months. Gradually, tiny victories accumulated. Longer stretches standing, a few tentative steps with support. The day it finally happened, the therapists cheered, but Elias heard only Naomi's voice. "You're doing it." He turned his head, tears slipping down his face. "No," he said softly. "We're doing it." She laughed through her own tears and hugged him. For a moment, he forgot the pain, the years, the chair. Everything except the woman who had believed when he could not. After therapy sessions, they explored the gardens with Rena, who had flown out after. Her final surgery and now darted among the blossoms with a bright pink hat. Elias often watched the little girl run, feeling gratitude so fierce it ached. One afternoon, as the sun melted into the horizon, he turned to Naomi. "You were right," he said. "The sky does cry and clear again." She smiled. "And now I think mine finally cleared." A festival filled the streets that weekend, floating lanterns drifting along the water, each carrying a wish. Naomi and Elias joined the crowd at the riverbank. Rena squealed as her lantern lifted into the night, wobbling before catching the current of air. "What did you wish for?" Naomi asked her. "That Mr. Elias keeps getting stronger," the girl said. Elias laughed, the sound unguarded and genuine. Naomi lit her own lantern, holding it between her palms. "And you?" she asked him. He looked up at the endless scatter of lights. I stopped wishing, he said. I started living. They released the lantern together, watching it rise until it became another tiny star in the night. Months later, when the doctors declared his therapy complete, Elias stood unaided for several seconds. The staff applauded. Rena danced in circles. Naomi wiped her eyes. On the flight home, he said quietly, I used to think I'd never leave that penthouse alive. You didn't, she said. The man who's going back isn't the same one who left. He looked at her, smiling. Then maybe that's the best kind of resurrection. The penthouse greeted them with the same sweeping view, yet it felt transformed. The air seemed warmer, lighter. Elias had installed an accessible garden on the balcony, where Rena planted flowers every weekend. Naomi's laughter filled the halls. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias wheeled himself onto the balcony and found Naomi already there, gazing at the skyline. Naomi, he said softly, you changed everything. She turned toward him, eyes shining. No, Elias, you just needed someone to remind you your life wasn't over. He stood slowly, gripping the rail for balance. She reached out instinctively, steadying him. He leaned forward, brushed a gentle kiss against her forehead. Thank you for reminding me what love feels like. Below them, the city lights flickered like thousands of lanterns on a river. Months slipped quietly by. The rhythm of life in the Wardell penthouse no longer echoed with loneliness. There was laughter again. Rena's quick giggle when she won at cards, Naomi's low hum. As she cooked, and Elias's voice joining theirs like a melody he had almost forgotten. Outside the windows, the skyline gleamed, but inside, the true brightness came from the people who had filled that space with warmth. The billionaire who had once counted his value in numbers now measured it in moments. Every morning Elias took slow, deliberate steps with a cane, crossing the living room toward the balcony garden. Each step was imperfect but real. Naomi always walked beside him, pretending not to notice when he leaned a little too heavily on her arm. Rena had fully recovered. Her laughter was louder than ever, and her favorite game was teaching Elias how to pot flowers. You press the dirt gently, she'd instruct, tiny hands demonstrating. He'd obey, grinning. Yes, ma'am. Sometimes he looked up from those moments and thought, this is wealth. One evening, Naomi found him in the study, writing something in his neat, deliberate script. What's that? She asked. A letter to my board, he said. I'm stepping back from business. It's time the company had a leader who believes in people more than profits. Naomi smiled. That sounds like a man who's finally free. He nodded. I used to think control was freedom. Turns out, letting go feels better. The next day, a courier arrived with a heavy envelope. Inside was the deed to a new rehabilitation center being built on the outskirts of the city, the Wardell Clare Institute for Recovery and Renewal. Naomi gasped. Elias, you... He shrugged lightly. You taught me that healing multiplies when it's shared. It felt right to put your name beside mine. She covered her mouth, eyes brimming. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. It's not kindness, he said softly. It's truth. None of this exists without you. That evening, they stood on the balcony as dusk painted the city in gold and violet. Wind stirred the flowers Rena had planted. Their scent drifted upward like memory. Naomi leaned against the railing. Do you ever miss the man you used to be? Elias smiled faintly. Sometimes. But I think he had to disappear so I could finally meet the ones standing here. She turned to him. And who's that? A man who finally understands that love isn't weakness. It's the reason we get back up. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Below them, the city lights shimmered like the lanterns on that Thai river, each one a tiny declaration that hope still floats. Sometimes life breaks us in ways we never saw coming. It takes away the certainty, the plans, the pieces of ourselves we thought defined who we are. But if we're brave enough to open the door again, even a little, love has a way of walking in. Elias Wardell learned that true strength isn't measured by how far we stand above others, but by how deeply we kneel beside them. Naomi Clare reminded us that compassion costs nothing but changes everything. And little Rena proved that the smallest hearts can carry the greatest courage. Thank you for watching Mr. Donovan Stories. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters, and subscribe for more stories that restore faith in love, courage, and second chances. Because sometimes the richest lives are the ones rebuilt from broken pieces, and the greatest success is learning to love again.